Vincent Brooks did not look like the kind of man who belonged in chains. He looked like a tired dad who had run out of chances. He stood at the front of a Fulton County courtroom, wrists locked in front of him, orange cloth hanging loose over a body worn down by night shifts and worry. His son, Jamal, was across the room in the gallery, small hands balled into fists as a social worker's arm blocked him from running forward. The room was quiet enough that Vincent could hear his own breathing and the soft, broken sounds Jamal tried to hide behind his sleeve. He did not understand all the legal words thrown on him these last few days. He only caught pieces: felony, repeat offense, flight risk. None of it sounded like the man who spent his nights mopping floors and his mornings packing school lunches in a cramped Macon apartment. The clerk read out his case number. The air felt thin. Vincent lifted his eyes toward the empty bench, telling himself this was some mistake that a judge would clear up once they actually looked at him. Once they saw he was just a father who clocked in, clocked out, and tried to keep his boy out of trouble. Then the side door opened. The judge walked in, black robe moving in slow, steady waves as she crossed behind the bench. Vincent's heart kicked against his ribs so hard it hurt. For a second, the courtroom dropped away. All he saw was a face he knew from somewhere that had nothing to do with this place. Rain. Cold. Headlights on a Georgia road. Her eyes met his. The judge froze. Only for a breath. Her gaze widened, as if pulled back into that same night, that same road. Then the wall dropped back over her features, smooth and professional, the way people look when they decide their feelings are a problem. She sat, straightened a stack of files, and Vincent saw his name on the top folder under her hand. The bailiff called for order. The prosecutor started talking with a firm, practiced voice, reading from the file like it was a script already written. He spoke about stolen goods and prior incidents, about patterns and risk, about how some people never learn until the system teaches them a harder lesson. Vincent stared at the table, jaw tight, because none of this sounded like the man who rushed from job to job just to pay for inhalers and rent. He wanted to shout that they had the wrong story. But when he glanced up again, he found the judge watching him, her eyes not cold, not warm, but caught somewhere in between. She looked down at the file, then back at him. The pause was too long. Everyone in the room felt it, even if they could not name why. Vincent watched her wrestle with something behind her calm face, as if she heard a voice the rest of them could not. Her fingers tapped once, softly, on the edge of his file. When it came time to set bail, she leaned toward the microphone. Her words were steady, but her eyes were not. She said his name in a way that told him she remembered it from someplace outside this courtroom. For a brief second, hope cut through the fear. Maybe she would help him. Maybe she would see him. Then the numbers came down, higher than anything he had in this world. The request for release was denied. Jamal broke into loud sobs in the back, fighting against the hand on his shoulder. Vincent felt his knees weaken, not from the cuffs or the guards, but from the fact that the only person in that room who knew he had once stood soaked on a dark road, helping a stranger, had just chosen the system over him. The judge's eyes flicked to Jamal, then to Vincent, then away. Whatever passed through her face in that moment was gone before he could name it. All that remained was the sound of the gavel and the knowledge that this woman, this same woman whose stranded car he had stopped for in the rain, now held his future in her hands. Now, before we go back and see how a long, wet night on a Georgia road led to this moment, a question for you watching this. If you were dragging yourself home from work, broke, cold, and your kid was waiting on you, would you still stop to help a stranger in the dark? Drop your honest answer in the comments, hit subscribe if stories like this speak to you, and share this with someone who needs to think about how one choice can change a life. Now let's go back to where this really began. Long before the chains and the courtroom, Vincent Brooks woke up in a small apartment in Macon, Georgia, to the quiet sound of his alarm and the louder sound of his own bones arguing with him. The bedroom was more of a corner than a room, barely wide enough for his mattress and a crate that held a lamp, a Bible, and a stack of unopened bills. Down the short hallway, his son slept on a pull-out couch that groaned every time Jamal turned over in his sleep. Most nights, Vincent lay awake for a few minutes just listening to that sound. It reminded him why he kept going. The air in the apartment always felt a little damp, like the building had given up on keeping out the weather. Paint peeled near the window where rain snuck in during storms. The fridge hummed louder than it should, sometimes going silent long enough to scare him into thinking it had finally died. He could not afford for it to die. He could not afford for anything to die. So he talked gentle to old machines like they were tired friends and hoped they would hold out a little longer. Most mornings started the same way. Vincent slipped out of bed as quietly as he could, careful not to step on the one floorboard that squeaked loud enough to wake the whole building. He stood in the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror under a yellow light that made his eyes seem even more tired. Dark circles sat underneath, like bruises that never healed. His hands were cracked from cleaning chemicals and hot water, knuckles rough from years of hauling trash bags and scrubbing floors after other people went home. He pulled on the same faded work pants he wore every night, the same dark hoodie with a zipper that stuck halfway up. His sneakers were thinning at the bottom, one lace knotted where it had snapped months ago. He told himself he would buy new shoes when things calmed down. Things never did. There was always another bill, another fee from the bank, another school form with a box asking for money. In the kitchen, he poured cereal into 2 bowls, careful to spread the last of the milk so that Jamal's bowl looked a little fuller than his own. He set out a banana that had more brown than yellow on the peel and cut the dark spots away so his son would not see them. The clock above the sink told him he had just enough time to get Jamal ready for school, drop him off, grab a quick nap, and then head to his night shift cleaning offices downtown. Sleep was something he measured in minutes, not hours. "Dad?" Jamal's voice came soft from the couch as he sat up, covers falling from his shoulders. He was 8, with big eyes that carried more worry than any child should have. He rubbed his face and yawned, then smiled when he saw the cereal waiting. "Morning, buddy," Vincent said, keeping his tone light. He always did that. Even on days when his chest felt heavy, his voice stayed soft for his boy. "Eat up. Bus will be here soon." As they sat at the small table, Jamal looked at his father's hands while he chewed. "Why your hands always like that?" he asked, reaching out to touch the cracked skin. "It looks like they hurt." Vincent pulled his hand back without thinking, then forced himself to lay it flat on the table again. "They're just a little dry," he said with a smile that did not reach all the way to his eyes. "Comes with hard work. Means we're still standing. Are we gonna move one day?" Jamal asked. "To a place where my bed is not a couch?" That one landed in Vincent's chest like a stone. "Yeah," he said quietly. "One day. I'm working on it." He did not add that every time he thought they were close, something knocked them 2 steps back. A late fee. A medical bill. A cut in his hours at work. The walk to the bus stop took 10 minutes if they hurried. They passed other apartment doors with sounds spilling out, TVs, arguments, music, the cry of a baby who did not want to be put down. On the corner, an older woman in a church hat nodded at them every morning and slipped Jamal a peppermint. It was their tiny, shared ritual of kindness in a street that rarely had any to spare. At the school, parents gathered in small clusters. Some wore work badges and clean coats, others checked their phones and barely looked up. Every now and then, Vincent caught a glance that slid over him and did not stop, or eyes that looked him up and down like a problem nobody wanted to claim. He heard things, too. Half-whispered comments about people who never seem to get it together, about fathers who only show up when the law gets involved. None of it was said to his face. All of it landed on him anyway. He knelt to zip Jamal's jacket all the way to his chin. "You listen to your teacher," he said. "You stay out of trouble. That's your only job." "What's your job?" Jamal asked. Vincent hesitated. My job is to make sure you got a place to come home to, he said. To keep that roof up there and food in that little fridge. That's it. Jamal nodded like it was the simplest thing in the world. He hugged his father quick and ran toward the building, turning to wave one more time before he disappeared through the doors. Vincent stood there a moment longer than he needed to, just watching the spot where his boy vanished, then turned toward the bus stop that would take him back home for a few hours of broken sleep. The city moved around him. Cars cutting through the morning, buses hissing as they pulled away, people in nice coats walking fast, earphones in, eyes straight ahead. He walked past brick storefronts that held more memory than money now, past churches with signs out front asking folks to come in on Sunday and trust that things would get better. He believed in God. He just wasn't sure God believed in his section of the map. By the time evening rolled around, Vincent was back on his feet, heading to the office building where he worked nights. He clocked in while most others were clocking out, nodding at faces that hardly noticed him. His job was to make their mess disappear before they came back in the morning. Streaks on glass, stains in the carpet, trash left under desks filled with snack wrappers and coffee cups, it was his silent duty to wipe away all the signs that they had lived a full day in those rooms. He moved from floor to floor with his cart, the wheels squeaking over tiles. The air smelled like cleaner and printer paper. By midnight, his back ached and his eyes burned, but he kept going. Every trash bag he tied shut was another step toward rent. Every floor he mopped was another step toward Jamal's school shoes, his inhaler, his field trip fees. Sometimes, though, while the building stood empty and the clock pushed past 1 in the morning, Vincent would pause by a window and look out over Macon. The city lights flickered like a tired chest trying to keep breathing. He thought about people in warm houses with extra rooms and full fridges. He wondered if they ever looked down at men like him and wondered how they were doing. Most nights, he decided they did not. Yet for all that, there was a line inside Vincent he would not cross. He would take extra shifts. He would skip meals. He would walk in the rain to save on bus fare. But he would not cut corners at work or lie to get ahead. Somewhere deep down, he believed that keeping his word, even when nobody thanked him for it, was the only thing that made him more than his situation. He had no idea that this same quiet sense of right and wrong was about to pull him off his usual path one night. He had no idea that choosing to help a stranger instead of hurrying home would drag him straight into the kind of trouble that could tear his life apart. The night everything tilted started like any other long shift. By the time Vincent pushed his mop across the last strip of hallway, the office tower in downtown Macon was quiet enough to hear the buzz of the lights. He checked the clock above the break room sink. If he moved fast, he could still catch the late bus and be home in time to peek in on Jamal before the boy rolled over onto the cold side of the couch. His feet hurt inside thin sneakers that had outlived their promise. His lower back throbbed from lifting bags that weighed more than they looked. Still, he wiped down the final counter, straightened the chairs, and made sure everything was in place. Leaving a space clean felt like the only part of his day he could control. In the locker room, he pulled on his torn jacket. The zipper stuck halfway, as always, and he yanked it up just enough to cut the chill. His phone buzzed with a new text from the utility company, another warning, another deadline. He stared at the numbers for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen, then turned the phone face down and slid it into his pocket. Light, heat, water, these were the bills you did not miss. But there was only so much one man could do on a cleaner's pay. Outside, the city felt different. Rain hammered the streets, turning the sidewalks into shallow streams that soaked his shoes in seconds. Traffic had thinned to a few cars cutting fast through the wet shine of the road. The bus stop was a 5-minute walk if the weather was kind. Tonight, it was not. Vincent hunched his shoulders and started down the block, each step kicking up cold water. He could have waited under the overpass until the bus came, but that would have meant standing still, and standing still made him think about everything he was trying to outrun: rent due next week, an inhaler running low, a son who needed new shoes before the toes gave out. So he kept moving, letting the rain wash the day off his skin. As he neared the on-ramp to I-75, something caught his eye. Up ahead, on the shoulder just past the bus stop, a set of hazard lights blinked through the storm. Each flash cut through the dark like a weak heartbeat. A car sat half-tilted near the guardrail, one side down like it had given up. Vincent slowed. He could see a shape behind the wheel, a head bowed, a hand wiping at the glass. For a second, he told himself it was not his problem. He had a kid waiting. He had a bus to catch. People out here drove better cars, wore better coats, carried better insurance. They could call someone. They could pay for help. But then a thought crept in, quiet but sharp: if that was Jamal stuck out there one day, or someone who loved him, would he want folks to walk past? He stopped under the bus stop sign, water dripping from his hood, and looked from the empty road to the stalled car. The bus was still a dark shape far down the line. He had a little time. Not much. Just enough. "Come on, man," he muttered to himself. "You can't just leave her out here." With that, Vincent stepped off the curb and into the road, shoes sliding for half a second before he caught his balance. Rain smacked his face, stinging his eyes. He raised a hand as he crossed, more from habit than need. There were hardly any cars passing by now. The closer he got to the stalled sedan, the more out of place it looked: glossy paint, nice rims, tinted back windows. The kind of car that did not usually share space with men like him. He reached the driver's side and rapped his knuckles on the glass. The figure inside jumped. After a moment, the window rolled down a crack, letting cold air and the sound of rain rush in. "Hey," Vincent said, voice raised over the weather. "You all right? You need help?" The woman behind the wheel looked like she had stepped out of a different world and straight into the storm by mistake. Her hair clung damp to her cheeks, and a neat coat that probably cost more than his rent hung open at the collar. Her phone sat on the console with a nearly dead battery icon glowing red. "I hit something," she said, breathless. "Tire went out. Roadside is taking forever. I don't know what else is wrong, and I..." Her words broke off as she really looked at him: the thin jacket, the wet hoodie, the work badge still clipped to his chest, the tired steadiness in his face. There was a flash of caution in her eyes, the instinct people had been taught about strangers on dark roads. But there was fear there, too, and something like shame at needing help in the first place. Vincent stepped back a little so he would not crowd the window. "Pop the trunk," he called out. "I'll take a look. You got a spare?" She hesitated, then pressed the button. The trunk clicked open. He walked around to the back, rain running down his neck, and lifted it. A spare tire sat there, along with a small jack and a tire iron that looked barely used. "All right," he said quietly to himself. "We can work with this." As he bent to set up the jack, his fingers went numb from the cold. He shivered, teeth starting to chatter. Still, his movements were steady. He had changed enough tires on old cars over the years to know the drill. Behind him, the driver's door opened, and the woman stepped out, pulling her coat tight around her. "You don't have to do this," she said, raising her voice over the rain. "They said they'd be here soon." "Sure," he replied, not looking up. "But soon don't mean the same thing out here at night. You don't need to be sitting on this road any longer than you already have." She came closer, holding her phone out as a weak flashlight, the beam shaking a little. From this distance, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth stayed set in a thin, calm line even as water dripped from his chin. He could see the way her hands trembled, not just from the cold. He glanced up once, meeting her gaze. For a moment, time seemed to thin. Two strangers, soaked on the side of a Georgia road, standing too close under the same sheet of rain. There was no flirting, no bold words. Just a quiet pull in the air, like both of them were holding back confessions they had no right to share. "You coming from work?" she asked, trying to fill the silence. Yeah, he said. Night shift. Got a boy at home waiting on me. He hates when I'm late, but he hates the light bill getting cut even more. Something in her face softened at that. You have a son? 8, he answered. Smart. Talks too much. Thinks I can fix anything. Can you? She asked softly. He gave a small, tired smile. Not everything. Just tires and leaky sinks and school lunches. The big stuff is above my pay grade. She almost laughed at that, a short, broken sound. I work in the courts, she said, then seemed to regret saying it. Long days. A lot of files. Same kind of big stuff, I guess. He nodded, tightening the bolts. Must be nice. Having people listen when you speak. She did not answer right away. Because the truth was, even in her high chair at the courthouse, there were rooms where her voice still did not carry as far as it should. But she swallowed that thought and held the phone steady as he finished the work. When the spare was on and the tools were put away, Vincent stepped back, wiping his hands on his pants. He was shaking from head to toe now, jacket soaked through. She dug into her purse with clumsy fingers and pulled out a folded bill. Please, she said, holding it out to him. For your time. For everything. He looked at the money, then at her. Her eyes were bright, not just from the rain. He could tell she was used to solving problems with a card swipe or a signature. He could also tell that this was her way of saying thank you while keeping their worlds from touching too closely. I can't take that, he said, voice flat but kind. Just get home safe. Come on, she pressed. It's late. You helped me. Let me do something. He shook his head, stepping back. I just need to catch that bus and get back to my kid. That's enough. The rejection hit her in a place she did not expect. Not as an insult, but as a reminder that kindness could exist without a price tag. For a second, she felt small in front of this man in the worn jacket and tired sneakers who had chosen to stop for her when he could have walked on by. Thank you, she said, and this time the words came out different, less like good manners and more like a confession. He gave a small nod. No problem, ma'am. As he turned away, she watched him walk back toward the bus stop, shoulders hunched, shoes splashing through puddles. She almost called after him to at least take her umbrella, her card, something that would make this moment easier to file away. But the words stuck in her throat. Moments later, her car eased back onto the road and disappeared into the rain. The city swallowed her up long before Vincent ever learned her name. The next morning started with the sound of Jamal coughing in his sleep. Dry, tight coughs that always made Vincent's chest squeeze with fear. He rolled off his mattress and crossed the small living room in 3 steps, kneeling by the couch where his son lay tangled in thin blankets. You all right, champ? He asked, smoothing a hand over the boy's head. Jamal blinked awake, eyes watery. I'm okay, he said, voice rough. It's just the air. It feels funny. Vincent glanced at the old vent on the wall, caked with dust he could not quite reach without a ladder he did not own. The building manager had promised months ago to send someone to clean it. Nobody ever came. I'll crack the window a little, Vincent said. Change it up in here. He pulled the glass up an inch, letting in a sliver of cold air and the sound of traffic. Part of him worried the chill would make Jamal's lungs worse. Part of him worried that keeping the window shut would do the same. Most days, he just did what felt least bad. In the kitchen, he checked the inhaler on the counter. 2 more puffs left before the little cylinder was done. He ran a thumb over the label, thinking about the copay. The pharmacy already knew his face. Knew the way he asked if there were any discounts, any programs, any help. Sometimes they found a coupon. Sometimes they just shook their heads. He set out breakfast again, cereal, this time without fruit, because the last banana had gone soft overnight. As they ate, Jamal swung his legs under the chair, socks full of holes at the toes. "Dad, can I sign up for the field trip?" he asked between bites. "They're going to the museum in Atlanta. Ms. Carter said we can see real dinosaur bones." "That so?" Vincent said, forcing a smile. "How much is the trip?" $30, Jamal replied. "She said there's a form in my bag. We gotta turn it in this week." $30 felt like $300 when every dollar already had a job. Vincent chewed slowly, doing the math in his head. If he skipped a couple of lunches at work. If he waited on paying the water until the second notice. He might make it work. "Let me see the form," he said. "We'll figure it out." Jamal beamed. "Thanks, Dad. Ms. Carter said she hopes you can come as a chaperone too." That part hit harder. The idea of walking with his son through a museum, of being just another dad on a school bus, not the man always racing the clock. He wanted to say yes, right away. He also knew the trip was on a weekday morning when he should be sleeping before another night shift. "We'll see about that," he said gently. Grown UPS got to get permission from their bosses too. On the way to school, the sky was gray, the sidewalk slick from the storm that had raged through the night. Jamal skipped around puddles, backpack bouncing, energy already miles ahead of his father's tired steps. Vincent watched him, a mix of pride and worry sitting in his chest like a weight. At the entrance, clusters of parents gathered again. Some flashed easy smiles and coffee cups. Others wore that same strained look Vincent saw in his own mirror. A couple of fathers in pressed shirts and clean shoes stood off to the side, trading stories about sports leagues and summer camps. As Vincent walked past, he caught a piece of a conversation. "You know how it goes, man," one said. "Some folks just keep making bad choices. Then they wonder why the court's always on them." The other chuckled. "Yeah, and their kids gotta suffer for it. It's sad, but what can you do?" Vincent did not know if they were talking about him or someone else. The words still burned. He kept his face calm for Jamal's sake, but his jaw clenched as he waved his boy toward the door. "I'll be here this afternoon," he said. "Right at that spot. Don't worry if I look a little tired. That just means I've been working for you." Jamal nodded, serious. "Love you, Dad." "Love you more," Vincent replied. On the bus ride back to the apartment, Vincent stared out the window at Macon slipping by. Storefronts with "For Lease" signs. Corner lots with half-empty gas pumps. Churches with banners calling people to prayer. This was home, and yet some days it felt like the ground itself was waiting for him to trip so it could swallow him whole. After a few hours of broken sleep on the mattress, he woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the crate. A new email from his supervisor blinked on the screen, asking him to come in early that night for a quick talk before his shift. Those words never meant anything good. At the office, his supervisor leaned against a desk, arms crossed. "Look, Vince," he said, voice trying to sound casual. "We had a little issue last month when that storage room went missing supplies. Now there's this note on your file about a pending legal matter. I just want you to know, if there's any kind of real trouble with the law, the company can't keep you. Liability and all that." "A pending what?" Vincent asked, frowning. "I don't have any kind of case. I got a speeding ticket 2 years ago. That's it." The supervisor shrugged. "Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe it's something small. Just know, if it turns into more, my hands are tied." On the way home that night, the words echoed in his head. Pending. Case. Law. He chalked it up to some error in the system or an old note from that traffic stop. He told himself things like this happened all the time, that some clerk somewhere mixed up numbers or names. A few days later, as he sorted the mail on the kitchen counter, a plain envelope from the county clerk's office slid out of the stack. His name was printed on the front in stiff black letters. He tore it open with his thumb. Inside was a notice ordering him to appear in court on a set date. No explanation in big bold letters, just a case number, a line about alleged offenses, and the time and place. Vincent read it 3 times. The date matched the week of the storm. The week he had stopped on the side of the highway when he could have kept walking. He set the paper down slowly on the table. Outside, somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, as if the sky itself was clearing its throat before speaking. When Vincent thought back on that night later, he did not remember every word. He remembered the sounds. The scrape of metal on wet pavement. The rush of passing cars sending waves of dirty water against his legs. The soft click of expensive shoes stepping out of a car onto a flooded shoulder. As he crouched by the back wheel, jack in place, the rain soaked him straight through. His fingers felt thick and clumsy. He flexed them, trying to get some feeling back, and reached for the tire iron. "Let me hold the light," the woman said, stepping closer. Her voice shook a little, but not from cold alone. She held her phone high, screen glow cutting a small circle through the dark. Up close, Vincent could see she was younger than he first thought, but her eyes carried an older kind of tired, one that came from years of being the person everyone expected to fix other people's mess. "You don't have to be out here," he told her. "You can wait in the car where it's warm." "It's not that warm," she answered, pulling her coat tighter. "And it feels wrong to sit inside while you're out here doing all the work." He grunted in a way that might have been a laugh. "Work is what I do," he said. "I'm used to it." For a while, they moved in half silence broken only by road noise and the clink of metal. He asked her to turn the light left, then right. She shifted when he asked, careful to keep the beam steady. The more she watched him, the more details she saw. The way he used his shoulder, not just his hands, to brace the jack. The way he checked and rechecked that the car was stable before taking off the flat. The way he kept glancing up and down the road, alert to any approaching headlights, as if protecting a stranger's safety had become second nature. "You said you have a son," she said after a while, almost as if she needed to hear something human over the rain. "How old is he?" 8, Vincent replied. "3rd grade. Thinks he's grown." "Does he know you're out here this late?" she asked. "He knows I work nights," Vincent said. "Thinks I'm some kind of hero for cleaning big offices. I try not to tell him it's more broom than cape." She smiled at that in spite of herself. "Kids see the best parts of us," she said. "Sometimes before we see it ourselves." Her tone carried a weight that made him glance up again. There was something in the way she held herself, shoulders tight under that fine coat, like she was used to being strong in rooms full of men who talked louder than she did. "You said you work in the courts?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes," she said. "Long days. A lot of decisions. A lot of paperwork." He could tell that was the short version, trimmed and neat. Like the kind of answer you give when you're leaving most of the story out. "Must be nice," he said. "Having real power. Being able to change something if it's not right." Her jaw tightened just a little. "Power sounds cleaner than it feels," she said. "Sometimes it's just pressure with better lighting." That line hung between them for a moment. He turned back to the tire. She shifted her grip on the phone, her knuckles white around the edges. When the new tire was on, he lowered the car back down and double-checked the bolts. He could feel her watching him closely now, studying the way his shoulders moved, the set of his mouth when he focused. Not in a romantic way, not yet. More in a way that said she was trying to memorize the shape of this kindness, because she did not see it very often without strings attached. "Where do you live?" she asked quietly. "Off Houston Avenue," he answered. "Little place, nothing special. We make it work." That's not far from the courthouse, she said, then quickly added, from where I work. Downtown. He nodded. Small city. Everybody's closer than they think. Their eyes met again. This time, neither looked away as fast. There was no smile, no joke. Just a shared look that said, without words, I know what it's like to carry more than people see. He stood up, rolling his shoulders against the cold. Water dripped from the edge of his hood down the bridge of his nose. She was close enough now that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her makeup had smudged slightly from the rain. Thank you, she said again, voice lower now. Really? I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come by. You'd have figured it out, he said. You don't look like the type to just sit and wait. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You'd be surprised. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded bill. It looked small in her hand, but Vincent knew it could mean a week of bus rides or a couple of extra meals. Please, she said, holding it out. Take it. It's the least I can do. He looked at the money, then at her again. The storm roared around them. He thought of the notice from the utility company, the inhaler on the counter, the field trip form waiting on the table. He thought of his son's eyes when he talked about dinosaur bones. Then he shook his head. I can't, he said. Why not? She asked, confused. You helped me. I want to help you back. Because then it turns this into a deal, he said. Like I stopped here to make a quick buck. I stopped because you needed help and I could give it. That's all. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. Nobody had spoken to her like that in a long time, like she was simply a person in trouble, not a title, not an office, not a chance to show off. You have a good heart, mister, she started. Vincent, he said. Vincent Brooks. Naomi, she replied. Naomi Whitman. The names hung there for a second, a quiet exchange in the middle of the highway. Neither of them knew they would hear those names again in a very different room. He stepped back from the car. All right, Naomi Whitman, he said. You should be good to go. Just take it slow till you can get that tire checked for real. She nodded, fingers clenching tight around the money she had meant to give him. Can I at least give you a ride to wherever you're going? She asked. It's too cold to wait out here. He shook his head again. Bus will be here, he said. Besides, my boy knows the sound of my key in the door. I like to walk in on my own 2 feet. Something in her chest twisted at that, the simple pride, the quiet need to show up for a child who trusted him. She wanted to say more, to ask about Jamal, about how he held everything together. Instead, she just said, be safe, Vincent. You too, Judge Lady, he said with a small grin, not yet knowing how close he had come to the truth. She smiled back without meaning to, the first real smile she had felt all week. Then she got into her car, shut the door, and pulled away. Vincent watched the red taillights fade into the curtain of rain, then turned toward the bus stop, soaked, cold, but strangely lighter for a moment. He did not know that somewhere ahead, in a courtroom he had never stepped into, that same woman would soon read his name from a file and have to decide what kind of man he really was. The storm moved on, but the trouble it left behind did not. 2 days after the night on the highway, Vincent finished another shift and stopped by the corner store near his apartment. He knew the prices there by heart. The cheaper bread, the off-brand cereal, the milk that was always a day closer to the date but marked down enough to matter. He grabbed a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and a small pack of chicken he hoped would stretch into at least 2 dinners. He checked his phone to see how much was in his account, doing the math as he walked the aisles. Every item was a choice. Every choice had a cost. At the counter, he waited in line behind a man arguing over lottery tickets. The clerk, a thin guy with tired eyes, made quick, jerky movements, scanning items, sliding change across the counter. Vincent set his basket down and reached for his wallet. That was when the owner stepped out from the back. He was a bigger man with a pressed shirt and a sharp look that swept the store like he was always waiting for someone to slip up. "Hey," the owner said, pointing at Vincent. "You. Open your bag." Vincent frowned. "My what?" "Your bag," the man repeated, louder now. "I saw you on the camera. You slipped something in when you thought nobody was looking." People in the small store turned their heads. A woman with a toddler pulled her child closer. Someone near the fridge section stopped mid-grab, hand hovering over a soda. "I didn't take anything," Vincent said, heat rising in his face. "I only got what's in the basket." "You can check." "Don't talk back," the owner snapped. "We're not stupid. You think this is the first time we've seen you in here?" "Open the bag." Vincent held up his hand slowly. "I'm telling you, man, I didn't steal," he said. "I got a kid at home. I'm not about to mess up my job over a pack of chicken." The clerk looked between them, nervous. "Maybe it's just a mix-up," he muttered. "The cameras." "The cameras were down earlier," the owner cut in. "But I know what I saw." He reached over the counter and hit a button under the register. A loud chime sounded near the door. Vincent's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. He had heard it before in other places when someone accused somebody of taking more than they paid for. He had never been the one standing under that alarm. Within minutes, 2 officers walked in, reins still on their shoulders from outside. One of them looked bored, like this was just another stop. The other scanned Vincent from head to toe with a slow, measuring stare. "What's going on?" the bored one asked. "This man tried to walk out without paying for some items," the owner said, voice suddenly smooth. "He's been hanging around here a lot lately. Always looks shifty. I'm not comfortable letting it slide." "I didn't try to walk out," Vincent said, keeping his tone as even as he could. "I was in line. I hadn't even paid yet." The officer with the hard stare stepped closer. "You got anything in your pockets that doesn't belong to you?" he asked. "Any reason we should believe the store owner is lying and you're telling the truth?" Vincent opened his palms again. "You can check," he said quietly. "I got keys, my phone, and a few dollars. That's it." The search turned up exactly what he said. Still, the officer's expression did not change. "Owner says you lifted something," he said. "You got any priors?" "Just a speeding ticket," Vincent replied. "That's it. I clean offices. I go home. I take care of my son." The words, "take care of my son," slid right past both the officer and the owner. Nobody asked about Jamal. Nobody pictured a boy sitting on a couch waiting for a key in the lock. "Look, we've had a problem with theft around here," the owner said. "We're not letting it slide anymore. I'm willing to give a statement." The bored officer sighed. "All right," he said. "Turn around, sir." Cold metal closed around Vincent's wrists before he could fully process what was happening. The officer clicked the cuffs tighter than needed, then guided his hands behind his back. The weight of them was heavier than it should have been. "Come on, man," Vincent said, voice cracking just a little. "This is a mistake. I got a job. I got a kid waiting on me. I didn't take anything." "People like you always say that," the harder-faced officer muttered under his breath. "You can explain it downtown." Those 3 words, "people like you," hit Vincent harder than the cuffs. He knew that phrase. He had heard it his whole life, wrapped in different tones but always meaning the same thing: poor, black, tired, easy to blame. As they walked him past the other customers, faces turned away. Nobody met his eyes. Nobody spoke up to say they had seen him waiting in line like everyone else. Silence did the work that words did not. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, but the ground was still wet. They guided him into the back of the squad car. The door shut with a heavy thud that sounded too final for a man who had only come in for bread and eggs. On the ride to the station, Vincent stared at the metal grate between him and the front seat. He thought of Jamal sitting on the couch, TV flickering, listening for footsteps in the hallway. He thought of the court notice on his table, the one he had meant to call about but set aside because the day had been long. At the station, the process moved fast and slow at the same time. Questions. Fingerprints. A photo under harsh lights. A list of charges read in a bored tone. Words like theft, prior incident, possible pattern. What prior incident? Vincent asked. Nobody ever told me about no other case. The officer shrugged. It's in the system, he said. You can talk to your lawyer about it. In the holding cell, steel bench under him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Vincent finally let his shoulders sag. Other men sat along the walls, some with blank stares, others pacing tight circles. He leaned back and closed his eyes. His mind should have been on the owner's lies, on the officers, on the formality of the charges. Instead, one image kept pushing through. A woman on the side of the highway. Rain in her hair. Her hand holding a weak light steady for him while he worked. The way her voice had softened when she learned he had a son. The small, careful smile when he called her, Judge Lady, without knowing who she really was. In a cell that smelled like metal and old sweat, with a future growing darker by the minute, Vincent found his thoughts drifting not to hate or revenge, but to that brief, strange warmth under a stormy sky. He did not know why his mind clung to that night. Maybe because, for a short time, someone had looked at him and seen more than a case, more than a job, more than a problem. He opened his eyes and stared at the bars. He had no idea the same woman was now sitting in a quiet office somewhere in Georgia, turning pages in a stack of files, about to reach his name and feel that same pull in her chest, all because of a rainy night on the highway and a man with cracked hands who said no to easy money. Naomi Whitman's days started before the sun came up over downtown Atlanta. By the time most people were pouring their first cup of coffee, she was already on the road, heading toward the courthouse with a stack of files riding in the passenger seat like silent company. The building she worked in had marble floors and high ceilings that made everyone speak a little softer. On the walls, framed portraits of older judges watched from the past, faces pale and serious, reminders of whose paths she had followed and whose rules still pressed on her shoulders. To most people who passed through her courtroom, Naomi looked like she had it all. A steady seat. A staff that respected her. A name that carried weight in legal circles across Georgia. They did not see the long hours alone in her chambers after everyone went home. They did not see the notes she still kept from her early years as a lawyer, the ones tied to a plea deal she had signed off on because a senior judge told her it was how things worked around here. A plea that kept a young man in prison longer than made sense, all because he did not have the right money or the right last name. That case had carved a mark in her memory. Ever since, she had been careful. Too careful, some said. She read every file twice. She asked more questions than her peers. She earned a nickname in the halls, by the book Whitman. Some used it with respect. Some with a hint of mockery. One night, after a long day of hearings, Naomi sat at her desk with a fresh stack of case files. The overhead light hummed. The clock on the wall ticked past 8. Down the hall, the cleaning crew's cart rolled by, wheels squeaking, a faint echo of the kind of work Vincent did miles away. She opened the next file and saw a name printed across the top, Vincent Brooks. Something in her chest tightened, though she could not yet say why. She glanced at the arrest date. Her eyes flicked to the officer's name, the store address, the description of the charge. A note in the margin mentioned, prior concern, at the same location. The more she read, the less it sounded like a simple shoplifting case and more like a story that had been written in a hurry. Her eyes drifted to the small coffee ring that had stained the corner of the file when an assistant had set the stack down earlier. The pattern of it, the way it cut across the printed date, sent her back in time without warning. Rain. A flat tire. A man with cracked hands and a tired smile saying he had to get home to his boy. The way he refused her money like it was poison. The way he called her, "Judge Lady," as a joke, not knowing how close to the mark he was. Naomi sat back in her chair, the file open in front of her. She stared at the name again, Vincent Brooks. Now the memory had a face. Not just a stranger on the road, but the father who had changed her tire and walked off into the night without asking for anything. Her fingers hovered above the page, not quite touching it. She told herself this was a simple coincidence. Big state, many people, same names repeating through families and towns. It could be another Vincent. But the arrest date lined up too closely with the week of the storm. The address lined up with the part of Georgia she had driven through that night. Romantic tension slipped in here, quiet and unwanted. She should have felt only concern as a judge, nothing more. Instead, she felt a faint, steady ache for the man who had helped her when she had been the one stranded and small. She wanted this to be a mistake in the file, not a mark on his life. Naomi closed the folder for a moment and pressed her palms flat on the desk. She reminded herself of every lecture drilled into her during training. Judges must stay detached. They cannot get involved. They cannot care more about one person than another. But lines are easy to draw in policy books and harder to keep when you have stood under the same storm with someone. When you have seen the way a man moves to protect a stranger, even when his own life is hanging by a thread. She opened the file again and quietly wrote a small note on a sticky tab. Review full record. Request additional documents. Check prior complaints tied to store and officers. No one else had to know why she was looking closer. On paper, it was just due diligence. In her heart, it was something more. The day Naomi first saw Vincent in her courtroom, the air carried the same heavy pressure as a summer storm in Georgia. Clouds gathered outside, shadows stretching across the courthouse steps. Inside, the docket was packed. Faces blurred together, defendants, lawyers, family members shifting in wooden seats, each with their own quiet panic. Naomi moved through the morning cases with her usual measured rhythm. Call the number. Hear the charge. Listen. Weigh. Decide. Keep her tone even so nobody could say she favored one side over the other. By midday, a clerk leaned toward her and murmured, "Next is Brooks, Vincent. Case file 18B472. The name landed on her like a dropped stone. Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. She did not look up right away. Instead, she turned one more page in the file as if checking a detail, giving herself 2 extra seconds to steady her breathing. Bring him in, the bailiff called. Naomi finally lifted her eyes. The door to the holding area opened. 2 deputies walked in, and between them came the man she remembered from the highway, only now in an orange jumpsuit instead of a soaked hoodie, wrists bound in front of him instead of holding a tire iron. For a heartbeat, the courtroom fell away. She saw him as he had been that night, standing in the rain, offering his coat, waving off her money. Now he stood under harsh lights, lines deeper around his eyes, shoulders heavier. Their eyes met. Recognition hit both at the same time. Naomi felt her pulse punch against her throat. She locked her expression down by force of habit, making her face into the safe, neutral mask she had practiced for years. But she could not control the flicker in her gaze, the small widening that told Vincent she knew exactly who he was. He looked back at her, confused, wounded, and strangely calm all at once. He had not expected to see the woman from the road again, least of all wearing a robe and sitting above him. The silent pull between them, born under streetlights and rain, rushed back in a wave. The prosecutor stood and began to speak, reading from the same file she had studied in her office. He painted Vincent as a repeat problem. Talked about ongoing concerns. Tied this new arrest to vague mentions of prior incidents that had never been fully explained. Naomi listened, pen in hand, but she also listened to something else, the memory of Vincent's voice saying he worked nights to keep a roof over his son's head. The way he had said no to her money, not with pride, but with a simple sense of self. She glanced at the report again. The camera had been out of order. The witness statement was written in the same rushed hand she had seen in other questionable files. The store had a string of complaints attached to it, all from the same neighborhood, all against people with similar profiles to Vincent. Her questions came out sharper than she meant them to. "Officer," she said, turning to the report. "Why was the recording equipment not functioning that night when it has been documented as working on other days that week?" The prosecutor shifted in place. "There were technical issues, Your Honor," he said. "We have a technician's note in the file." "I see no technician report attached," Naomi replied. "Please provide it before the next hearing." She could feel the eyes in the room on her now. Some of the lawyers in the back row exchanged looks. They were used to her thoroughness, but tonight there was something extra in her tone they could not quite place. Romantic tension hummed under every glance between the bench and the defendant's stand. Naomi never let it show past her eyes, but inside, the struggle was real. She was fighting not to see him as the man who changed her tire, not to replay the way he had stood shivering and still managed a small joke to ease her fear. Vincent watched her with a mix of hope and dread. He did not know what she would decide. He only knew that she was the first person in this process who looked at him like he was a human being with a life outside the file. When it came time to set terms, the whole room seemed to lean in. Naomi looked down at the numbers on the sheet, then at Vincent's record. No violent history. Stable employment. A child at home. But also pressure from above, spoken and unspoken, to be tough on anything the office labeled as repeat behavior. She paused. Too long. Long enough for the clerk to glance up in surprise. Long enough for the prosecutor to shift his weight. Long enough for Vincent to sense that this one moment might shape his whole future. She leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Brooks," she began, voice steady even as her heart pulled in two directions. "The charges before this court are serious, and the evidence as presented at this time raises significant questions that will need to be addressed." Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second on the words, questions, as if to tell him she saw the holes in the story. Then she straightened. "Given the nature of the alleged offense, the ongoing review of related cases, and concerns regarding appearance in court, bail is set at an amount this court deems appropriate under current guidelines." The number she spoke was lower than the prosecutor had requested, but still beyond what Vincent could touch. It was, by policy standards, a compromise. By human standards, it was a wall. A small sound escaped from the gallery. Jamal. The boy had been quiet up to that point, clinging to the social worker's sleeve. Now tears spilled over, and he tried to push past the woman blocking him. "Daddy," he cried. "Don't let them take you. Please." Vincent turned his head as far as the cuffs allowed. Seeing his son's face twisted in panic cut deeper than anything in this room. He wanted to run to him, to say this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he was gently turned toward the side door. Naomi's gaze snapped to the boy. Her hand tightened around the gavel. For just a heartbeat, all the years of training, all the lectures about distance, crashed against the sound of that child begging. She could almost feel herself stepping off the bench, walking down, saying something human. But she did not move. She could not. The roll held her in place like invisible ropes. "Court is in recess," she said, voice slightly rougher than before. As the deputies led Vincent away, he looked back one last time. Their eyes met through the space between the bench and the door. In that look lived every word they could not say. "I remember you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you without breaking myself open. Then the door shut, and the sound echoed like a closing chapter neither of them had meant to write. The ride back to the jail felt longer than the ride from the store. On the way in, Vincent had still believed this was a huge mistake someone would clear up. On the way out of court, all he knew was that a woman he once helped had just held his future in her hands and still watched him walk away in cuffs. In the holding area, the noise came in waves, men calling to each other from cell to cell, metal clanking, guards' radio chatter. Vincent sat on the bunk and stared at the floor. His hands rested in his lap, wrists red from the bind. He thought of Jamal's face behind that social worker's arm. The way his son's voice cracked on the word, "Daddy." He replayed that scene on a loop, his chest tightening each time. Later that afternoon, an officer came to his door. "You got a visit," he said. 10 minutes. Vincent stood and followed him down the hallway. They passed other doors, other lives on hold. At the end of the hall, a set of glass partitions waited, each with a phone hanging on either side. Jamal sat in one of the plastic chairs, legs swinging nervously. The social worker was beside him, looking down at a clipboard. When Vincent walked in, his son's whole body lit up and then sagged at the sight of the jumpsuit. Vincent picked up the phone. Jamal did the same, pressing it hard to his ear. "Hey, champ," Vincent said, forcing a smile. "How you holding up?" "You look different," Jamal said, eyes wet. "Why are you wearing that? When are you coming home?" Vincent swallowed hard. "I'm working on that," he said softly. "Grown-up stuff gets complicated sometimes. But I'm still your dad. That doesn't change." "Did you do something bad?" Jamal asked. "Ms. Turner said sometimes people make mistakes and the court has to figure it out." "I went to the store," Vincent replied. "That's it. I paid for my things. Someone said I did more than that. We're going to fix it." Jamal's gaze drifted toward the memory of the courtroom. "The lady in the black robe," he said slowly. "Is she mean?" Vincent thought of Naomi's eyes, full of conflict. He thought of the pause before she spoke, the way she had looked at him and then away. "I don't think she's mean," he said. "I think she's stuck. Like me. Like us. Sometimes people want to do right, but there's a lot holding them back." "Is she gonna help you?" Jamal asked. "I don't know," Vincent admitted. "But I do know this, you don't give up on yourself just because other people don't see you right." They talked about school after that. About the field trip form. About how Jamal had drawn a picture of a house with 2 bedrooms and a real bed for himself. All the while, a clock on the wall ticked down their minutes. When the visit ended, Jamal pressed his palm against the glass. Vincent placed his hand on the other side, lining up their fingers. They stood like that for a long breath, 2 hands separated by clear plastic and a system neither of them understood. Back in his cell, the emptiness hit harder than before. The other men faded into the background. The buzz of the lights turned into a dull roar. Vincent lay back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling. His mind drifted again to Naomi's face. To the storm. To the way she had said his name in court, softer than the other names that day. He did not want to think of her as anything but a judge now. It would have been easier to see her as just another part of the machine. But something in him refused that. He had seen too much vulnerability in her eyes that night on the road. The tension between them lived in a strange place. It was not romance in the way movies told it. There were no love notes, no shared dinners, no whispered promises. Their connection was built on a coat handed over in the rain, a tire changed in the dark, a child waiting at home, and now a courtroom where one held a gavel and the other wore chains. He could not say he loved her. He barely knew her. But he felt tied to her by a line he could not cut, even if he wanted to. He turned on his side and pulled the thin blanket up, pretending it blocked out the sounds around him. In the dim light, he whispered a short, simple prayer, not just for himself and his son, but for the woman on the bench who seemed to be fighting a battle he could not see. Back at the courthouse, Naomi did not sleep well for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vincent's hands in cuffs and heard the echo of Jamal's cry in the gallery. In the morning, she covered the circles under her eyes with careful makeup and walked into the building as if nothing had changed. On paper, she did exactly what any careful judge might do. She ordered additional documents. She requested the officer's full report, the store's prior complaint history, the technician's logs for the cameras. She told her staff it was about patterns and ensuring fairness. Behind closed doors, it was more than that. Late at night, when most of the floors had gone dark and only a few lights remained on in the halls, Naomi sat with Vincent's file open on her desk. Beside it lay 3 other cases from the same store, all with similar language in the reports. Same kind of charge. Same neighborhood. Same officer's name on the paperwork. She drew small connections in her notes, circling dates and addresses. She saw how accusations always seemed to land on men and women who already had it hard. She saw statements written in a rushed hand, copied lines, missing details. Every time she wrote Brooks, Vincent, in her own notes, a soft warmth pushed against her ribs, mixed with dread. She remembered how he had looked at her in court, shocked, betrayed, and yet strangely trusting, as if part of him still believed she might choose the right thing in the end. She knew she was not supposed to feel that pull. But feelings do not check court calendars. They do not ask permission. One evening, she took off her robe, hung it carefully on the stand, and changed into plain clothes. Dark jeans. Simple jacket. Nothing that screamed, judge. She drove to the part of Macon where the store sat. The streets there felt different from the ones near her apartment. Streetlights flickered. Sidewalks cracked. Kids played basketball in a lot with one bent hoop and no net. The store's neon sign buzzed over the door. She stepped inside, letting her eyes adjust. Shelves lined with canned goods and cheap snacks. A cooler humming in the back. A bell over the door chimed behind her, announcing her presence. The clerk glanced up, then quickly away, used to people passing through and not wanting to talk. The owner was not in sight. Naomi walked the aisles slowly, taking in the layout. Where the cameras faced. Where someone might stand and be partially hidden. She picked up a bottle of water she did not need, more for something to hold. "Excuse me," she said when she reached the counter. "Were your cameras working last week?" The clerk tensed. "They work most days," he said cautiously. "Why?" "I heard they were down during an incident," she replied, keeping her tone casual. "Just wondering if they're fixed now." He glanced at the small lens above the register. "They're fine," he said. "Must have been a one-time thing." His eyes darted to the side, toward the door that led to the back room, as if afraid someone might walk out and hear this conversation. Naomi saw the fear. She recognized it from witnesses who wanted to tell the truth but also wanted to keep their jobs. It was the kind of fear she had once felt herself when a senior judge told her to sign here and stop asking questions. "Busy place," she said gently. "Must be hard when trouble shows up." He swallowed. "Trouble always shows up in the same kind of shoes," he muttered before he could stop himself. She let that sit. Then nodded, paid for her water, and left. Back in her car, she gripped the steering wheel and stared through the windshield for a long minute. Rain tapped softly on the glass, a pale echo of the storm from weeks before. Her heart tugged in 2 directions again. On one side, her duty, her career, the unwritten rules of the courts. On the other, the quiet truth that what was happening to Vincent was not just one random event, but part of a pattern that had swallowed too many people like him. Whenever she softened, she reminded herself that caring too much could be used against her. She had seen promising judges pushed aside for being emotional or biased, especially when they tried to stand up for defendants who did not fit the favored mold. Still, every time she wrote his name in a note, a warmth rose in her chest she could not explain away. She told herself it was guilt. Gratitude. Human decency. She did not dare call it anything else. It did not take long for word to reach the wrong ears. One afternoon, as Naomi stepped out of her chambers, a senior judge waited in the hallway. He was older, with silver hair and a friendly smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had mentored her once, back when she was still trying to find her place in a room full of men who had already decided how things should go. "Naomi," he said warmly. "Got a minute?" She nodded and followed him into a small conference room. The door closed behind them with a soft click. "I've been hearing some talk," he began, hands folded. "Nothing official, of course. Just chatter. They say you've been digging into some low-level cases a bit more than usual. Asking for extra files. Visiting locations off the clock." His tone was light, but there was iron under it. "I'm just trying to make sure everything is handled fairly," she replied. "There seem to be patterns worth looking at." He chuckled softly. "Patterns are for policy makers and reporters," he said. "Our job is to move the docket, follow the law, and not get swallowed by every sad story that walks through the door." "This isn't about a story," she said. "It's about potential misconduct." "Careful," he warned, the smile fading. "You start throwing that word around, and you're going to make enemies you don't need. You've worked hard to get here. Don't risk all that over some shop cases from a part of town nobody votes from." The casual cruelty in that last phrase made her stomach turn. "Nobody votes from there," translated to, "nobody important will complain if we look away. There's talk of a state review coming down the line," he added. "They'll be watching us. Watching you. They like numbers. Fast resolutions. Clean records. If they see you lingering too long on files like this, they'll call it bias." "Bias toward what?" she asked quietly. "Toward justice." He sighed. "Bias toward defendants," he said. "Toward a certain kind of defendant that already makes headlines touchy. You know how this works. Let the process handle it. Don't make it your cause." When she left that room, Naomi felt smaller than she had in years. Old doubts stirred. That younger version of herself, the one who had signed the bad plea deal, whispered in her ear that maybe she was making the same mistake again, but in the other direction. Back in her office, she stared out the window at the city. Atlanta stretched wide, highways braiding together, neighborhoods tucked side by side. Some sparkled at night. Some stayed dim no matter how bright the sun hit them. She thought of Vincent again, of his quiet strength on the road. Of his eyes in the courtroom. Of his son's cry. Romantic tension twisted deeper now, not as a sweet fantasy, but as a sharp sense of shared weight. She felt pulled to him not because she wanted a love story, but because both of them were trapped on opposite sides of a fence built by people above them. Meanwhile, in the jail, Vincent sat with his public defender at a metal table. "Look," the lawyer said, spreading out papers. "I won't lie. The way this thing is written up, it's going to be tough. The owner is ready to testify. The officer's report is detailed. There's mention of a prior incident, which never helps with a jury." "I don't even know what prior incident they're talking about," Vincent said. "Nobody's ever said a word to me before this. Sometimes stuff gets logged and never moves forward," the lawyer replied with a tired shrug. "Doesn't stop them from using it to paint a picture." Vincent's hands balled into fists on the table. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "That I'm just stuck? That I say I'm guilty when I'm not, so they can go home early?" "I'm saying you have a son," the lawyer said bluntly. "You can roll the dice at trial and risk real time, or you can take a deal that keeps you away for less. I've seen this office go hard on cases like yours. They don't like to back down. You can't gamble with a kid at home. The words tasted wrong in Vincent's mouth. Admit to something he had not done, just to shave off years someone had no right to take. But the picture of Jamal behind that glass would not leave his mind. That night, as lights dimmed in the block, Vincent lay awake, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling paint. He felt torn in two directions. On one side, his sense of right and wrong, the same line that had kept him from taking Naomi's money on the road. On the other, his son's need, the harsh truth that the system did not care about his pride. Back in her apartment, Naomi sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. Vincent's file lay open next to her keys. She read the line about the supposed prior incident again and again, feeling a knot grow in her stomach. She knew if she kept pushing, she could bring heat down on herself. She also knew that if she stepped back now, she would be no better than the people who once told her to sign a bad deal and move on. Two different lives. Two different rooms. Same city sky hanging over both. Both of them lying awake, wondering if doing the right thing was going to cost them everything. The next time Naomi opened Vincent's file, it was not alone. A thin folder from a trusted clerk sat on top of it, edges worn like it had been handled more than it should. She had asked for old complaints tied to the same store and the same officers. The clerk, a quiet woman who had worked in records for years, had slipped her a look on the way out of the office and said in a low voice, "Be careful with this one." Now, in the still of her chambers, Naomi understood why. Inside were copies of prior statements from people who looked a lot like Vincent on paper, men and women from the same side of Macon, same income bracket, same kind of jobs. Some had claimed they were framed. Some had begged for camera footage that was missing. Some had written their own letters to the court in shaky handwriting when no lawyer had time to listen. Stamped across the top of several pages were the same three words: lack of evidence. Cases closed. Lives altered. Naomi rubbed her temple, anger building slowly. This was not about one man and one night anymore. It was about a stretch of road that always seemed to lead in one direction for people like him. Romantic tension rose again in a way that scared her. She tried to tell herself her drive came only from justice, from guilt over that old plea she had once signed. But every time she pictured Vincent's face, it brought a different kind of ache. He had stood for her in the rain with no reason. Now she felt something inside insisting she could not sit by while he drowned. Down in the jail, Vincent sat on his bunk when a guard called his name. "You got a visitor," the man said. "Not family. Pastor or something." In the small room set aside for clergy visits, Pastor Green from the neighborhood church pulled Vincent into a careful hug, the way you hug someone in a space that smells like metal and rules. "Your aunt called me," the pastor said, sitting down. "She's worried sick. She said it don't feel right. I told her I'd come see you myself." Vincent shrugged one shoulder. "What you see is what it is," he said. "They say I stole. I didn't. But that's never stopped anyone before." The pastor studied him. "You always were the stubborn kind," he said. "Even as a boy. Always cleaning up after other folks' mess, even when no one watched." "I don't feel like I'm cleaning much up now," Vincent replied. "Feels like I'm the mess they like to point at." The pastor leaned in. "I heard something, though," he said quietly. "Word is, somebody on that bench isn't letting this slide. Folks in the hall's talking about a judge digging deeper than the usual. They didn't say a name, but they said she." Vincent looked up fast. "Her?" he asked. "The judge? Naomi?" "I don't know her first name," the pastor said. "I just know men in suits don't like when one of their own starts asking too many questions. That tells me somebody up there sees you as more than a file." A tiny spark flared in Vincent's chest. He tried to tamp it down. Hope was expensive in his world. Still, the thought of Naomi alone in some office, fighting for him in ways he could not see, wrapped itself around him like a thin blanket in a cold room. That night, after the pastor left, Vincent sat on his bunk and let his mind drift where he usually did not let it go. He thought of Naomi on that road again, not as a judge, not as power, but as a woman with tired eyes who had looked at him like she wanted to say more than, "Thank you." He remembered her voice in the courtroom, how it had cracked just slightly when she set the terms that kept him in. He did not know if this strange pull between them would save him or break him. All he knew was that for the first time since his arrest, he felt like he was not standing completely alone. When Vincent was brought back into the courtroom weeks later, the energy felt different from the first time. The room was the same, high ceiling, wooden benches, flags at the front. But a low buzz moved through the crowd, like people sensed something was about to crack. This time, Naomi did not look at him right away. She focused on her notes, on the small, neat questions she had written in the margin of his file. Behind those questions lay nights of work. Visits to the store, quiet talks with the clerk, hours spent reading between the lines of reports that had been meant to close doors, not open them. The prosecutor came in with a stack of new paperwork and a tight jaw. He greeted the court with practiced confidence, but his foot tapped under the table, a tell he had never shown before. Naomi called the case. Her voice did not shake. State versus Brooks, Vincent. Vincent stood, chains at his ankles clinking softly. He kept his gaze low until he heard her say his name. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that both of them had changed since the last time they were in this room together. Naomi began with simple questions, her tone even. "Counsel, please explain again why the security recording system was not operational on the night in question," she said. "Provide dates of all reported outages for that month." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "As we said before, Your Honor, there was a malfunction that night," he answered. "The technician's report is still not in this file," she cut in. "I requested it at the last hearing. Do you have it today?" He shifted, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, we are still working on obtaining." Naomi did not let him finish. "Very well," she said. "Then we will hear from the store owner again." The owner took the stand, sweat already shining along his hairline. Naomi guided him through his earlier statement, then began to press into small details, how many times the cameras had failed in the past, why complaints from certain customers had never been logged, why calls to police always seemed to involve the same type of person. Each question tightened the net. Each answer sounded more rehearsed. Romantic tension hummed under the surface as Vincent watched Naomi work. He had never seen her in this role before, fully in control, voice calm but firm. It was nothing like the quiet woman on the highway. Yet, in every careful question she asked, he felt the same care he had glimpsed in her eyes that night in the rain. His lawyer, sensing the shift, jumped in when given the chance. He followed Naomi's lead, picking at loose threads. The store owner's story began to fray in public view. In the back, a few people whispered. They recognized this was no longer just about one alleged theft. This was about a pattern being dragged into the light. The prosecutor grew more aggressive, objecting often, trying to steer things back to simple ground. Naomi overruled him more than once, citing the need to understand context and credibility. The pressure rose steadily. Vincent could feel his own heart pounding. This felt like the closest thing to a chance he had seen. Then, just as momentum seemed to tilt in his favor, the prosecutor pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "Your Honor," he said, voice louder now. "The state has a new statement from an additional witness. This person claims Mr. Brooks threatened them outside the store on a prior occasion. We believe it speaks to his character and pattern of behavior." He handed the document up. Naomi read it, her jaw tightening. The statement described a late-night argument in a parking lot. It painted Vincent as someone loud and dangerous, throwing insults, making threats. It fit neatly with the story the state had been trying to build. But Naomi saw something else. She saw the signature at the bottom, a name she recognized from old case notes, connected to someone who once worked under that same senior judge who had pulled her aside in the hallway. Someone who had a habit of showing up to help the state when a case started to wobble. The room went still. Whatever hope had been building now hung in the air, fragile. Naomi looked at Vincent. He stared back, confusion and hurt written clear across his face. She could almost hear what he wanted to say, "I never did this. I don't even know this person." She swallowed hard. She could not throw the new statement out without cause. Not yet. Not here. "Very well," she said. "The court will review this edition. We will reconvene after both sides have had time to examine the new claim." Her voice stayed controlled, but inside, the ground shifted. She now knew for certain she was not just up against sloppy work. She was up against people willing to bend truth when their control was threatened. As Vincent was let out again, that thin line of hope in his chest bent but did not break. He had seen the look in Naomi's eyes when she read that statement. It was not the look of someone who believed it. He walked back toward his cell, stuck between fear and something like faith, not in the system, but in one person inside it who might be willing to stand in the crossfire for him. The message came the next morning. Naomi was called into the same conference room where the senior judge had warned her weeks before. This time, he did not bother with small talk. "You're pushing too hard," he said. "Do you have any idea whose name was attached to that new witness statement?" "I know exactly whose orbit they move in," she answered. "And that's part of the problem." He closed the door with a soft click. "Listen to me," he said. "You're a rising star. Everyone knows it. But stars burn out fast when they wander into the wrong fights. There are people with long memories watching how you handle this. If you turn one neighborhood case into a crusade, they will make sure you never see a higher bench." Naomi met his eyes. "What if this neighborhood case is tied to larger misconduct?" she asked. "What if people have been locked up on false claims, over and over, because it was easy?" "That's for committees and task forces to sort out," he said sharply. "Not you. Not from that seat. Your job is to move cases, not dig like a journalist." He softened his tone, but not his meaning. "You want to help? Fine. Make sure your sentences are within guidelines. Be polite. Don't embarrass anyone who signs your evaluations. But stop poking at this store, this officer, this prosecutor. It looks personal." The word personal landed heavy. Because a part of it was. Naomi knew that. She just refused to be ashamed of it. After he left, she sat alone in the empty room, hands pressed together so hard her knuckles went white. Personal. Yes, it was personal. Not because she owed Vincent romance or some dreamy future. But because she owed him honesty. Because a man who had nothing had once stepped into the storm for her without asking her last name. Back in the jail, Vincent heard about the new witness from his lawyer. "They're stacking the deck," the lawyer said. "I've seen this move before. When a case starts to slip, they bring in someone willing to say what they need. It doesn't always hold up, but it muddies the water long enough to push a plea." "Plea, plea, plea," Vincent muttered, pacing the small cell. "That's all anyone keeps talking about. Because it's the safest bet if the wrong people are invested in seeing you go down," the lawyer said. "You roll the dice at trial, they might decide to make an example." The walls felt too close. The air too thin. Vincent slammed his fist once against the concrete, then cursed himself as his knuckles throbbed. He imagined Jamal finding out his dad had lost control and felt a wave of shame wash over him. Later, when the block was quieter, he sat on the edge of his bunk and did the one thing he still knew how to do when everything else failed. He prayed. Not a long, fancy prayer. Just a simple, broken string of words. Help my boy, he whispered. Help me not lose myself. Help that woman up there, if she's really trying. Don't let this be for nothing. In her apartment that same night, Naomi sat at her own table, papers spread out like a map of all the ways the system could go wrong. She stared at the wall until her vision blurred, then put her face in her hands. She thought of every time she had looked away in the early years, telling herself, this is just how it works. Thought of that one man still serving time because she had believed a senior judge who said the plea was standard. She could not erase that past choice. But she could choose differently now. The romantic pull she felt toward Vincent did not come with daydreams of dates or soft music. It came with a fierce need to see him stand outside a jail again, to see him hug his son without fear, to know that one man who had treated her as just another person on the road did not get broken down into a warning story for others. She made her decision in a quiet, steady moment. If this case cost her favors, so be it. If it slowed her path to some higher title, so be it. There were worse things than staying where she was because she chose the truth. The next move happened far from the courthouse. Naomi met the records clerk and a young tech from the security company in a small diner off a highway exit outside Atlanta. The place smelled like coffee and fried food. A country song played low from a jukebox in the corner. They chose this spot because it was far enough from both Macon and the city, a kind of nowhere in between where no one would expect to see a judge in jeans and a hoodie. The tech, a man in his 20s with nervous eyes, slid a small flash drive across the table. I'm not supposed to do this, he said. But I checked our logs. That store did not have any recorded outages on the night that guy was arrested. In fact, the system ran smooth. Someone pulled the footage after and marked it as corrupted. But we keep backups off-site for a week. Almost missed it. Naomi swallowed. You watched it? She asked. He nodded. Yeah. I figured if I was going to stick my neck out, I should know what I'm dealing with. The guy, he didn't take anything. He paid. Full amount. There was another man near the back who slipped something into his jacket, but nobody bothered him. The clerk shifted in her seat. I've seen this happen on paper too many times, she said. All those lack of evidence stamps. Now I know why some of them never sat right. Naomi slipped the drive into her pocket like it was made of glass. Thank you, she said quietly. You both understand this could cause trouble for you. The tech shrugged, but his hand shook. I got a little sister, he said. She dates a guy who works nights and rides the bus. Looks a whole lot like that man in the video. If he got caught in something like this, I'd want someone to do the same. On the drive home, Naomi pulled into a rest stop off I-75 and sat in her parked car, laptop open on her knees. She plugged in the drive, clicked the file, and watched. There he was. Vincent. Walking in with shoulders a little hunched from a long shift, placing his items on the counter, counting his cash twice, bagging his food, and heading for the door. No grabbing. No slipping. No sudden moves. In the back corner, another man stuffed goods into his jacket. The camera caught it clear. Nobody stopped him. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes before she even realized they were there. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, angry at herself for crying alone in a car like some rookie who did not know how the world worked. Romantic tension swelled again, but in a new way. It wasn't about what might be between them. It was about what already was, a thread of trust that had started with a car on the side of the road and now demanded she stand up for him with everything she had. She drove back to the city with a new kind of resolve. In the days that followed, she worked with care to make sure the footage could enter the record properly. She followed the rules, even as she used them to push at the gaps. When Vincent's lawyer visited him with a still image from the video, a frame showing him at the counter, hand above his money, no stolen items in sight, something in Vincent's chest lifted that he had almost forgotten he carried. Where did this come from? He asked, voice hoarse. From someone who doesn't want to see you buried, the lawyer said. Officially, we'll say it came through the proper channels. Unofficially, you got someone on the inside who actually cares that the truth matches the charge. Vincent stared at the photo for a long time. It was strange, seeing himself like that. Just a man in work clothes, doing something simple. Yet that simple act could now be the thing that kept his life from breaking. He did not say Naomi's name out loud. But inside, he whispered it like a promise he refused to let go of. The final hearing drew more people than usual. News had started to spread in small, quiet ways. A few defense lawyers who had lost similar cases in the past found reasons to sit in the back. A couple of community members from Vincent's neighborhood made the trip, sitting together in the last row. Naomi walked into the courtroom that morning with her robe hanging heavy on her shoulders, but her step steady. She knew her choices today would leave marks, on her reputation, on the files, on the lives in front of her. When she called the case, Vincent stood with his lawyer. His hands still shook a little, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. The court has received additional evidence related to this matter, Naomi began. A recording from the store's security system on the night in question. The prosecutor immediately objected. Your Honor, the state was not informed of any new footage. You were informed when the court requested the technician's full report, she replied, her tone firm but calm. The fact that this material was not brought forward sooner is part of what we are addressing today. She nodded to the clerk. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen at the side of the room came to life. Everyone watched. They saw Vincent enter the store, as ordinary as any man stopping on his way home. They saw him place his items on the counter, count his cash, wait, bag his things, and leave. No rush. No hiding. Nothing that matched the words, grabbed and concealed, written in the original report. They also saw the other man in the back pocket items without paying. They saw the clerk glance toward him and then away. They saw no call made, no accusation thrown in that direction. When the video ended, the room was so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioner sounded loud. Naomi let the silence sit for a moment. Then she spoke. The court finds that the visual evidence presented today directly contradicts key elements of the original statement used to justify the arrest of Mr. Brooks, she said. Furthermore, the pattern of similar cases tied to this location, combined with prior complaints, raises serious concerns about how certain individuals in this community have been treated under the law. She turned to Vincent. Mr. Brooks, she said, voice softening just a little. Based on the evidence now before this court, the charges against you are dismissed. Your record in this matter will be cleared. For the first time since his arrest, Vincent felt the chain around his chest snap open. He did not cheer. He did not shout. He simply let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the night on the side of the road. Jamal, sitting with a relative this time, burst into tears again, but now they were different. He grabbed the hand next to him and kept whispering, "He's coming home, he's coming home." Romantic tension peaked in a quiet moment as Vincent looked up at Naomi. Their eyes met, and he let everything he could not say live in that look, gratitude, respect, a deep, unspoken bond forged in storms and steel rooms. Naomi held his gaze for one heartbeat longer than she should have. Then she turned back to the record. This court also recommends a formal review of prior cases involving this store, the officers tied to its reports, and the handling of evidence, she said. The law exists not only to punish, but to protect. When it fails to do so fairly, we are obligated to act. With that, the gavel came down. The sound marked an end to one kind of fight and the start of another. Outside, the Georgia heat wrapped around Vincent as he stepped through the courthouse doors in his own clothes again. Jamal ran forward and jumped into his arms, holding on like he would never let go. Vincent lifted his son and closed his eyes for a second, feeling the solid weight of the boy against him. All the nights in that small apartment, all the long shifts, all the fear, it did not vanish, but it finally had somewhere to go. He glanced back toward the top of the courthouse steps, half expecting to see Naomi standing there. She was not. Inside, she sat alone in her chambers, robe draped over the back of a chair, regular clothes back on. A quiet peace and a fresh worry sat side by side in her chest. She knew there would be conversations, maybe consequences. But for once, they did not scare her as much as the thought of looking away would have. Weeks later, life did not turn into a dream. It turned into something steady. Vincent found work as a custodian at a local school in Macon, a job that came with regular hours and health benefits. He walked the halls during the day, emptying trash and straightening desks, sometimes pausing by classroom doors to hear kids laughing. He liked knowing he could be home when Jamal walked through the door after school. Their new apartment was still small, but it had 2 bedrooms. Jamal had his own bed now, not a couch that groaned under every move. On the nightstand beside that bed, under a small lamp, sat an envelope that had come in the mail with no return address. Inside was a folded bus pass from downtown Atlanta to the courthouse district. No note. No name. Vincent knew who had sent it. Not because of the pass itself, but because of the quiet courage it took to send anything at all. One evening, as the sun slid down over Macon and the sky turned soft orange, Vincent stood at a bus stop with that pass in his pocket. He had not yet decided whether he would use it. Part of him wanted to leave things as they were, a clean slate, a saved life, no more weight put on a woman who had already risked enough. Another part of him wondered what it would mean to look her in the eyes outside of a courtroom. Not as a defendant and a judge, but as 2 people whose lives had collided on a wet strip of highway and changed course. The narrator's voice settles here, low and steady. One rainy night, a poor, exhausted father chose to help a stranger on the side of an American road when he had every reason to keep walking. He did not know she would one day stand above him with the power to end his story or fight for a fair one. He did not know his small act of kindness would reach all the way into a courtroom and push a woman in a robe to remember who she was before titles and pressure. Now he stands under a calmer sky with a bus pass in his pocket and his son safe at home, held up by a choice that seemed small when he made it. Whether he ever uses that pass or not, whether he ever walks up those courthouse steps just to say, thank you, face to face, one thing is clear. Sometimes the road between justice and mercy starts with a stranger in need and a tired man who still chooses to stop. And long after the credits would roll on a screen, that question hangs in the air for anyone watching. If you once saved someone in the dark without knowing who they were, and later they held your whole future in their hands, would you trust that bond enough to meet their eyes again?